So there's UFC 237 coming up this Saturday, and I've been watching the embedded series on YouTube, and I got to one episode and I discovered Jose Aldo is fighting on the card, and I see his coaches there in the room with him, Andrade and then I discover BJ Penn is there, and for some reason I hadn't checked the card for UFC 237, and BJ Penn is fighting Clay Guida, and I didn't know that. So I was inspired to make a podcast about it because it kind of excited me because I get to see BJ Penn and Jose Aldo there together with Andre Petnaris, and it's the old Nova team, but it's also my lineage from Andre Petnaris to Tony Manuel to Danny Dring to Brian Wilson, and then there's me in that line. So it's interesting to see those guys on the card. Win or lose, it's part of the lineage, and I get to watch them and support them. But also, there's Anderson Silva on the card. And I'll just do a rundown of the card here from the main event. Some fights that I'm excited to see. The Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade. Jared Cannonier versus Anderson Silva. Then we have Jose Aldo versus Alexander Volkanovski. We also have a good fight here with Thiago Alves versus Laureano Staropoli, and I hope I pronounced that right. But some good fights there on the main card. As I switch to the prelims, we have Antonio Rogero, may have pronounced that wrong, but Antonio Nogueira versus Ryan Spann. And then on down, there's BJ Penn versus Clay Guida. And some of you may catch those prelims, and I think they're showing those on ESPN. There's also early prelims on Fight Pass. So a good card, and I'm going to talk about some of these fights. So I'll start off talking about BJ Penn versus Clay Guida. And it's been several years, but I met Clay Guida in Springdale at some of the fights up there. I got a chance to talk to him, stand in front of him. I think he's fought at 145 in the past, but this fight against BJ Penn is at 155. Clay Guida stands at 5'7". BJ Penn stands at 5'9". They both have the same reach of 70 inches. Leg reach is pretty similar, within a half inch. And similar body types, which if you've seen them both fight before, their fighting style. Clay Guida, he loves to wrestle. He's striking, has proficient striking. He's trained with, I believe, Team Alpha Male, but I'm not sure who he's training under for this fight. So looking at a good matchup, but Clay Guida style, looking for him to go in, throw a little hands, and wrestle him to the ground. Look for some the ground and pound against BJ. I think it's a good style matchup. We know BJ he's a proficient striker. He's with also still with Jason Perilla for this fight, working the hands. And so we get to see if BJ's going to keep it on the feet or take it to the ground. If it goes to the ground, we're in for a good treat for grappling. Both of the guys are coming off losses because we all know BJ Penn's last loss was to Ryan Hall by the submission with the footlock. Not familiar with Clay Guida's last fight. I'm thinking he's coming off a knockout loss, but don't hold me to that. So both fighters coming off losses, both of them eager to get the win, I know. So hopefully we get to see how they match up on the ground and see how they match up on the feet. But I see BJ Penn fighting from the outside, throwing a lot of strikes. He's good guy. He has good takedown defense, but be ready to watch for him on the clinch up against the cage because I'm sure Clay Guida will take it there. And so we move on and talk about, I don't know a whole lot about Jose Aldo's opponent, Alexander, but excited to see Jose fight after so long of a layoff. We hadn't seen him in a while. We know he suffered the losses from Conor McGregor, and I believe those are the fights that's probably on everybody's mind, even though Jose's coming off a win. I think everybody is still thinking about the fights from Conor McGregor and the losses there when Jose suffered the knockouts. So I'm anxious to see that. Anxious to see Jose get a W. And move on to next, Jared Cannonier versus Anderson Silva, which is a interesting fight and an interesting dynamic. Cannonier from the U.S., Silva, he's training down in Brazil now, getting back to some of his roots and getting back to the old days of, the training. But if you watch an embedded series, you get to see Cannonier, you get to see Silva, but we see Cannonier in some of his interviews. He seems a little emotional, and I don't mean emotional in a bad way. He seems a little emotional about the fight, and he's eager for the win. He's identifying Silva as not, he's not holding him up on the pedestal as one of the greatest. He sees him as a human, 2 arms, 2 legs. He's going to go out there and do his damage and take his win over the great. But he seems a little, when they had the stare down, he looked a little like he carried some anger with him into the fight. That may be a little bit an obstacle for him to overcome if he's carrying too much emotion or too much anger into the fight. Silva, as usual, says he's going to get the win. Silva's down ranked at 14. Cannonier's ranked at 10. Although the ranking's not going to make a difference when they go toe-to-toe, I do see, Anderson Silva taking this fight. Cannonier's coming off a win. Silva's, coming off the loss. But it's another one, a great matchup. That'd be good to watch. I'll be behind Silva and rooting for the win. Jared's a younger fighter. He's a heavy-handed striker. I think experience pays off for Silva to stay away, but he can't. I don't think he's good for him to sit in the pocket and take punches like he did in the Adesanya fight and some of his other fights that he's had and some of the sparring rounds that he'll do. He'll just kind of sit there and take punches. I think he needs to stay away from them, especially if he wants to endure through the fight and take the win. And if it comes down to decision, it's not good that he take a lot of punches. So we move on to Rose Thug Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade. And we know Rose obviously coming off a win. Jessica's coming off a win. And we have this fight at 115 pounds. There's only 3-inch discrepancy in the height. Rose with the height advantage. Also the reach advantage. I think she has 3 inches over in the reach. Not a huge difference, but it may be enough. Rose is the kind of fighter that she's well-rounded, and she's well-rounded that she's a good striker. She's good on the feet. She's good at keeping her back off the cage. She's good on the ground. She's good at attacking with submissions, not just ground and pound. She's a threat from the top and the bottom when it comes to the ground game. Jessica Andrade, she carries some heavy hands. Obviously, she's going to look to strike more than be on the ground, I believe, and try and land the most punches in the fight, either taking this by knockout or by decision. My pick to win the fight is Rose Namajunas. I think she comes out on top. I've watched her fight for a long time since since I can't remember the exact league I remember seeing her fight in, but I know it was at an amateur and watch her come up through the ranks before she got to the UFC. And I know she's a durable fighter. But overall, UFC 237, I think is going to be a good card to watch. If you're watching on the ESPN or if you're looking for the pay-per-view, I think you'll get your money's worth buying this fight. And I'm not speaking for the UFC. I don't work for them or anything like that, but some of the cards the worth on them is better than others. But I think this is one that you'll be entertained from with some good fights on here. But this is, like I said, inspired me to do the podcast because of the lineage and watching BJ Penn. He's one of my favorite fighters, win or lose. But this one, I decided to pick up my phone and just speak straight into my phone, so I apologize now for the audio quality if there's a lot of ins and outs, and I hope you bear through it. But I don't want to take up too much time, right along 10 minutes here, and, podcast off the cuff. I hope you enjoyed it. This is Mega Talks. And if you like this podcast or any other podcast that you've listened to, make sure you tell a friend about it. Like and subscribe, share it with your friends. Also, some of the recent podcasts that I've had, you can catch me interviewing Whit Piker of Cheat Mill, Joe Paderak, he's chief of police at Pottsville. Also, Greg McEwen of the McEwen Band. He's a rock singer, at least his own band there. Also had the Trying Out for Sports podcast, the Denial podcast, and appreciate every one of you that's downloaded and listened and shared. But appreciate you right now for making it to the end of this podcast. And I'll catch you on the next one. I got a little something I've had planned, hadn't released it yet. But be listening for the next episode to come up. I appreciate every one of you listening. Catch you guys later.